Hello friends, my name is RagePanda1 and today I want to have a look at Maxroll.gg to see if these leveling guides are any good at all. I have tried to use one of them to see if this was a viable video concept, and I was fairly impressed, but there were some issues. But before we even make our character, we need to go to the website. The link for this build is going to be in the description below, and there are a couple of things that you want to know before you even start playing the game. Of course, it's a good idea to read the whole guide, but like most people on the internet, I imagine you're probably not going to do that. So we're going to scroll down here just a little bit, and we're going to look at our early setup. They want us to be using Glacier as much as possible. We'll use Mana Strike when we're low, and we want to teleport around the map as quickly as we possibly can. Now, when I show you this video, I'm going to show you how I'm skipping a lot of the things in the early game. Traditionally, that's the fastest way to level through when you're trying to speed through the campaign. If it's your first playthrough, then take your time and smell the flowers, by all means. Then we're going to scroll past this final setup section. We don't need that yet. It's not important yet. What we actually want is our skills and passives. Now, there are a couple of important things to know about this section of the website, and they did a really good job. If we click through these arrows at the top, we can see that they have guides for different sections of gameplay. The first one is generally for your first 20 passive points before you get to pick a specialization, and this one actually has a little bit of a respec that you do halfway through, so there are 3 sections. After you get to 28 points in Runemaster, you'll come back and respec some of those points out. So it's important to know that these things exist in the guide, otherwise you might think they're only telling you 20 points you got to put in. But even better than that, if you go to the bottom of this, there's a scroll bar, and you can scroll back and forth and actually watch the order that they were putting these skill points in. All we want to remember here, is the first 20 skill points and the order that they put them in. So we're going Arcanist, Elementalist, -1 point, and then we're going to put 5 in Mage Flurry. That's all we need to remember, and we should be able to play for quite a while without having to look at it again. If you gotta take a screenshot, then by all means, feel free. And then the final thing that we need to be aware of before we start playing our character is the gear. They give you an idea here of what are good prefixes and suffixes. It's a good idea to have a look at that, and then if you see them, you put that kind of gear on. However, this is where the guides kind of lose their luster a little bit, because the game is just more complicated than this. It's not their fault that they can't make a perfect guide for the gear. It's just that the gear is really complicated. So they get to do what they get to do, and you got to just roll with what you get. However, we are going to download our loot filter, and then we're going to make our character and import it. So to do that, we just click on Download Loot Filter, and after we click on that, it's going to take us to this giant string of information. Luckily, there's nothing to actually download here. You don't got to worry about viruses, but you do need to copy it all. We're going to press Control-A and then Control-C, and that will be copied to our clipboard. Now we can make our character. And for this experience, we're going to name Mr. Tywin Lannister Maximus Roll, because, hey, why not? You gotta have fun with it. Now, one thing that I'm not gonna do this every single video that comes out, but I just want to show you that in this first part, you really don't even need to fight anything. It's actually pretty slow, and the experience is not very good. But the game is going to give us a way that we can take advantage of this early game system to get free XP, because they give us an NPC that's going to kill everything. It gives us a lot of XP. We want to be behind the level of the area that we're in anyway, so that's not a problem. Alright, we're in the next zone. I literally haven't killed anything. This is where you're going to start killing stuff. Not these first guys. You're going to wait until they start fighting each other, and then if you see some that are getting low, like these guys here are about to have a big old fight, you can turn around and zap a couple of them in the booty cheeks, and then you're going to be getting some free XP with no danger at all. You don't have to do that even, because what we're going to do is get over here, and this godly beast is going to start freezing everybody. Now we're going to start clearing stuff out. Now we start clearing. You do have to dodge and weave and be a little more careful than I'm being, though. There you go. Now we talk to the guy. We got a friend. He's going to take us all the way to town, and it's really that simple. Now we'll follow him, and we'll do whatever he wants to do for killing while we're still making progress towards town. And this is when I like to put on my loot filters. I don't know about you. So I'm going to press Shift-F. I'm going to import a filter, since that's what we're doing from the website. We're going to paste it from the clipboard contents, which is on the bottom. And there you go. It literally is that easy. And we're going to name it Runemaster Leveling. Now, we don't need to fully understand what this loot filter is doing, but we do need to keep an eye out for the high value affixes that we read about in the guide earlier. So we remember that we need Arcanist first, so we're just going to start pumping points until that's full. And the trap with leveling, if you're trying to do it quickly, is that you're going to talk to all of the people, maybe listen to them, which you should do the first time around. The game deserves that sort of attention. But you're going to spend a lot of time gearing and putting in passive points and looking back at the guide. So the more that you can remember early, the better it's going to be for you. Now we're feeling good. We just hit level 4, and now we get our Elemental Blast. And killing things becomes so much easier at this point because it's such a great skill. And one of the things that I think that the Maxroll guides could do a little better is talk about the first few levels rather than just getting to your first 20 passive points. And the reason is because a lot of people who are using those guides don't know what the game is about at all. They don't know how to play it, and they're not just looking for the best build to level with, they're looking for how to level in general. So I think that talking about the first few levels before you get everything they were talking about can still be a good idea. You're going to notice I'm still skipping a lot of packs because we don't need them. We really don't need them. But now that we've gotten to safety, we can already specialize one of our skills, and the thing is, we don't even have Glacier available to us at all, and that's the first skill that they talk about us using, and the other one is Frostclaw, and that's pretty deep as well, so for now, we're going to use Elemental Nova, and I feel like they should have covered that in the guide. And personally, I like Ice Nova here. For one thing, I think it looks really cool, but it also has a chance to freeze enemies, which makes them easier to deal with. And when you're fighting big packs like this, kill the archers first. They're the worst. They will eat you alive if you let them. Now, it's not weird for people to have a hard time on this boss, but just know that this game is largely about dodging mechanics and killing the archers that are eating you alive from the background. They never miss. They just never miss. Now, when we get to single target, Fireball is doing a little more damage for me, so that's what I'm going to stick with. Easy. Wasn't even close. Never mind that I was out of potions. Now we've hit the wonderful point where we get to use Glacier, and it is a very strong spell. I will give it that. It would be completely unusable if we did not have Mana Strike. So what we're going to do is we're going to use all of our mana with Glacier, and it lets us overcap. So we'll be able to cast it, even though we don't have enough mana to cast it. We will go negative. We'll get just back into positive with Mana Strike, and then we're going to Glacier again. And since we're switching skills now, we didn't have Glacier before, but we do want to be speccing into that. We will despecialize this skill, and we will go ahead and make that Glacier. And this is another point where we get to hop on back over to our guide because we're starting to get skill points for skills that we're meant to be using. So we're going back to our skills and passives, and luckily we can click right into the skill, and it's going to tell us where we should be going, and much like before, we can slide the slider to see where to start and where to go. One thing you're going to notice is that very often they will do 2 points instead of 4 just to get to the next node, 1 point instead of 4. And so on. Usually they're picking a core talent in this tree that they want to really have on their bar, and then they're going to go to town making sure that they get there as fast as possible. And that means putting in the minimum amount of points that you need to make the traversal to the important skills. And now we get to talk about the loot filter a little bit and why it's working. So you're going to notice this is highlighted, which means it's all capitals, and it's red text. Why do they think that this simple item is so important? It comes with intrinsic movement speed, which is great. It also rolled with movement speed. It's probably just those two things that made it do it. The fact that it comes with intelligence as well is super good for this character, so that piece is going straight on. Luckily, we also have a couple of silver rings here, and they rolled with kind of okay movement speed on them, so we should be zooming right now. That is a very lucky find for us. And one thing I want to mention is that we can group up bigger groups of enemies to make sure that we're hitting as many people as possible. That's going to require us to regain our mana less often. It's always a good thing to do, and we just found ourselves a unique, beautiful. What we really want to see is we want to see some armor shred, but I don't think this is the one. Group 'em and poop 'em, that's what I always say. I'm so sorry, that's unprofessional. Now in parts like this where there's a little bit of role-playing going on, this is a great time to put in your skill points or to go through your inventory and see if there's anything that you needed that you haven't put on yet. Stopping every time you get a piece of loot is not necessarily the most efficient. Now you can see the power of this build when you're just grouping everything up and getting huge attacks off and you're doing a ton of damage. That's why they've chosen the skills that they've chosen, and I think it's a pretty good setup, to be fair. Turns out these guys might know a thing or two about the game. And a lot like how cool guys don't look at explosions, you don't need to watch the glacier do all the killing. You don't need to do that. You might miss a couple of drops here and there, but it's fine. The gods have smiled on us once again on this day because we found ourselves a nice little blue staff here with a simple bit of increased cold damage. So this staff is going to be pretty much huge for us because obviously we're using all cold skills right now. And if you happen to be rich with shards, it's okay to craft this up a little bit extra just to make it a little bit stronger. But you absolutely do not have to do that, and crafting on blues is not always the best choice. We have unlocked our second specialization, and we want to make sure that we get stuff in there as soon as we can so that we're actually leveling those points. And of course, we just want to get as much mana as possible because the only thing we really care about is our damage from Glacier. We just continue like this for the rest of time, grouping them up, killing as many as you can, and not worrying about the stragglers. I can't stress it enough. A truly miraculous thing has just happened for us. We have unlocked Teleport, and we also have our Flame Ward, which they want us to be using in this build. That means we can start zooming and zooming, and we love that. So everywhere we go now, we want our teleport to be on cooldown. There are some instances when you're playing in hardcore, if you feel like you're punching up a little too high, where you might actually save your transportation abilities to save your life, but the cooldown's usually low enough that it's fine. So let's see how this build fares against a real boss. Keep in mind we're abusing our mana as much as we can. I gotta say this is absolutely shredding. Doesn't hurt that I got the cold damage staff, to be fair. But I also didn't twink out my character at all, which I could have. All too easy. So far, a most impressive build. And when we get to 20 passive points, it's going to completely change. So I'm going to keep grinding like this and I'll meet you there. Now this is a boss we might be able to showcase some of the shortcomings of this build. And when I say shortcomings, I mean it, because the attacks are not very long range, and it means that you have to be in certain positions to be able to get your attacks to go. And when you're dodging or they're doing giant AoEs around them like that, you just can't get in to do what you need to do, and it feels a little bit bad sometimes. It does feel a little bit bad, and he has more than one attack that is that way. He also has attacks where you have to sort of just dance around the outside of him because he's channeling a laser beam of fire, which we're about to see here. And you're dancing around, you can't sit there and melee attack as much as you might want to, so it ain't bad. But that part of it is not good for this particular boss fight. Another thing I want to bring to your attention in this build is that we are getting our Runemaster build unlocked. We're getting the specialization unlocked, but we don't have enough points yet to start respeccing and switching into different things. And we're going to notice on this screen here that we already have 8 points into Runemaster before they're even really considering moving on. So there will be a respec, but it ain't happening yet. So our next goal has become to unlock our third specialization slot. We're going to put Frostclaw in that slot, and then we're going to try to get that up to level 4, at which point we're going to be able to respec some of our other points, and in this case that's going to be making Flame Ward our first specialization, and you can see the same skills will stay in the second and third slot here. We have unlocked our new specialization slot, and that is fantastic. And we're going to put Frostclaw in there. And you're going to notice that right when we put it in there, it's already got 4 points available. And that's exactly what we're looking for our guide. So we're going to have to refer back to that. And we know that we're despecializing this skill and turning it into Flame Ward. And our whole situation is about to change. We've also unlocked our Flame Rush spell. So that's going to replace Teleport. And unfortunately, our entire build is fire now instead of ice. And so all of our cold damage is no longer good. We'll just look through and see if we got anything in our builds that's going to help with that. Here we have something that's going to do extra physical damage on melee, and it's going to increase fire damage. We do have a melee skill, but it ain't our damage skill, so we're not that excited about that. Looks like that's the best that we've got available, and that's fine. We're just going to forge it up to give us as much extra fire damage as we can get. And while I'm at it, I'm going to forge up some other things to give me some fire damage as well. Now this brings us to another very important section, which is all of our gearing process. And they do a great job of telling us what sort of affixes we need when we just mouse over an item. So we want on our helmet, for instance, fire damage over time, chance to ignite on hit. Those are both great things. Our weapon, we want fire damage and damage over time if we can get it. Rings, fire damage, you get it. This is for the section of 11 to 25 levels. They also have 26 to 40, which is going to be roughly the same. And so we just want to keep an eye on the level range that we're at and try to use common sense, because they don't directly tell you that exactly when you respec, you're switching from doing cold damage to fire and you need to change your prioritizations. If they do say that, then it's buried somewhere that I was too lazy to read, so fair credit to them if they did. Somebody can point that out in the comments. Just be aware that when you're respecing and switching your damage type, you want to pay attention and you want to adjust your gear accordingly. And one of the best things that you can use to get that gearing done is if you have something like this helmet that only has one prefix on it, I can add another prefix of my choosing from whatever is on the list that I might like. Now, a lot of you are going to be like me, and when we look at the affixes that they have, like chance to ignite and fire damage over time, we're not going to have the shards for that, and that's fine. As long as you understand what is good for your character. I know that intelligence is actually going to make me do more damage, as well as some other benefits, and so we're going to go for that on this piece of gear. And I will also mention in this section, even if you're on a regular normal playthrough and you're not doing hardcore, resistances are still very important, and when you're just grinding campaigns, specifically physical resistance is what you want to get through the first few acts, and then you're going to notice you're taking some void damage. You might switch to void. You might take some necrotic damage, and then you'll switch to necrotic. So just pay attention and put in what you think is going to be the best thing, because you probably are going to be correct about that. It's fairly easy to tell in this game. Now we'll do a little test of this build against another exiled mage, and I have a feeling it's going to perform a lot better than the other one did, because he won't be able to teleport out of our stuff nearly as much. But I do want to talk about the Flame Ward on here. You want to be using it, but you want to use it at the right time. Like, I know I'm going to eat attacks right there. I put my Flame Ward up. I'm going to dash in to try to get extra damage after I have to back away for an attack like that. But still, my Flame Ward's only now coming back up, so I have to be careful with when I use it. If I imagine some damage is coming my way, then I'm going to use it. And that's a little bit tricky for a leveling build for a newer player. You kind of have to be able to read the attacks a little bit. Well, that took forever and it was painful, but we're still at the beginning of starting to get our passive points for our individual skills, so it's to be expected a little bit. It is worth mentioning that this respec is still pretty good against hordes of enemies. You can still blow people up real nice. It feels like a downgrade from the Glacier, but when you get to a single enemy with a lot of health, it feels bad, man. Feels bad. But I'm sure we'll get there with our skill points. Now, we looked through our guide and we knew what we wanted when we got to the end game. So we've been looking out for stuff like this pair of bracers. This is going to give us freeze rate multiplier and some cold resistance. Those are both good things. We might want to use that shard when it comes to the end game. So what we're going to do, we're not going to use these bracers right now, but we are going to use a Rune of Shattering to break that apart. And then we got our shard that's going into our crafting so we can put it on something later. And now we're going to get to see how bad this gets against a real boss fight. Nice thing about this build compared to the last one is that we actually have range. Not the most thrilling gameplay you've probably ever seen, but it got the job done, so I can't complain. Now this is exactly what we're looking for, is getting people all stuck in a line so we can flame dash through them. Exactly what this build is good at. And now we're far enough into our tree where we're starting to have mana issues and we actually have to use our mana gain ability, which is not too bad. You just gotta keep an eye on it. Thanks, Mana Strike! As I continue leveling, I have to pay attention to some other certain features. Now you may notice that we haven't been talking about my last skill on my bar. I've had my Flame Ward, my Dash, my Mana Strike, and my Frost Claw. Now I need to have Runic Invocation on my bar in this last slot. It didn't matter before that, but it does now. And the reason is because we're starting to put points into Edict of the Scion. And what this is going to do is it's going to increase the area for our skills and give us some ward whenever we use these skills based on the amount of active runes that we have, and we can only gain those if we're getting our Runic Invocation on our bar. So that's why it matters now. We're not really pressing this button, but it's there for a reason. At this point, what I've realized they're trying to build here is a pretty brain-dead build. You just hold attack and you live forever because you're getting a bunch of ward. It's pretty easy at this point in the game. Now hopefully I can get a demonstration here of when you gather up a group of enemies and you dash into them and explode them and you go to town, you do have to watch your health a little bit. Because we have our flame shield, which I intentionally didn't use there so you could see. You take a lot of damage if you don't have your ward up. Now this build is great for producing ward for you so that you can do that, but if you're going to be diving into the middle of a group of enemies, you need to be ready to pop that ward right away. And then when that wears out and you are maybe out of mana and you're going to do some extra mana, be ready to hit that potion or you will die. You might not care if you're on normal, but if you're on hardcore, you do not want that. Now perhaps I could be accused of nitpicking on this tiny little point here, but if you look in this tree and you count up the points, there's actually 21 points there. However, their picture says that they're 28 points. And that's because it's not changing. It doesn't change with how many points are put in there. However, when we go a little bit farther in, we start putting points into a different tree. And we need to pay attention because they said that we need to have 28 points into our Runemaster tree before we switch over. And that's not going to happen for a little bit of time here. So we are switching into a different tree now. We're going to be going into the Sorcerer tree to get our Arcane Momentum. So it's kind of a small thing, but it might trip you up if you're working your way through the guide and you're not sure why it's saying that there's more points in there than there actually are. Now we're ready for the exciting part. I'm going to go off of the guide just a little bit here, because what the guide is telling us to do is to go all the way to Chapter 7, and by Chapter 7, we'll make sure we have all of our passive points and all of our idle slots, and then we're going to go into monoliths. And that is a perfectly valid strategy, and if I was on hardcore, I absolutely would be going that far before I tried to go into monoliths. But I'm on normal on this character, I'm not on hardcore, although, if you want to hop over to my streams, which happen both on YouTube and on Twitch, then I do stream hardcore over there, and it's quite a good time. Unfortunately, I just lost a character yesterday. But what I'm going to do instead of going all the way to Chapter 7 is I got to the Oracle's Abode. I'm going to make sure I have enough passive points and skill points that I'm happy. I'm going to get all of my resistances in order. That's very important because otherwise we're going to get absolutely demolished. Then I'm going to go straight into monoliths. And I'm going to grind out monoliths until I'm happy with it, or until I'm like level 60. And then I will probably go back and do a Temporal Sanctum, teleport my way into Chapter 9, and then I'll finish out there, and that's where I'll get the rest of my passive points and idle slots. It just depends on if you want to get grinding sooner or later. I want to get grinding sooner, to be honest with you. Alright, we are at the land of the monoliths, and we are about to do the thing. Now, I cannot stress enough that if you are on hardcore, you should not do what I am doing. That is not what this is for. My gear is not quite to the place that I would want it to be to go into monoliths at all. I would want my resistances capped. Most of them are around 50 to 60. That's not good enough on hardcore, but we have a very tanky build. We're trying to test the limits, and that's why I'm willing to go in here the way it is. If I see people casting Void, probably going to be a little bit scared. I'm not going to lie to you. That's going to be scary. I am going to go for these experience books every chance that I get, and I'm going to avoid ones that say arena, although I will do arenas to get experience books. Some people might say that that trade-off isn't worth it. I like what I like, okay? Now for the scary part. We're performing. We are certainly performing. That's a good sign. That is exactly what you want to see. And it's an indication of a decent build. I don't like having to go for mana here at all. But you can see how valuable getting some sustain in your build is. That could be leeching health, that could be getting a bunch of ward, which is what this one is going for. You need something like that in your build. Now this build is extremely heavy-handed on it, and I can't say that I hate it, to be honest. It is pretty good. But I think that using these leveling guides, that's the sort of thing you should try to look for. You can learn how to build an efficient build by following the guides, but they're not necessarily going to tell you everything that's exactly the best for your account. Maybe you got a really good unique or a really good set item or something like that that is going to make your build lean in a different direction. It's okay to pivot to those things if that's what you get. But as a guide. Very impressed with this. I have done these monoliths at this level before, and I have had equal success to this, although I must say that on this particular build, I feel even more comfortable being right in the enemy's faces, even though my resistances aren't great. But, that being said, when we get to these little pools, this is where the test really comes in. Can I be successful while I'm fighting these? Because a bunch of these elite enemies show up and it gets dicey real fast. Real fast, and one hit can end your whole run. So far, I like what I'm seeing. I'm going to use these little minions to gain my mana back, and then I'll go attack this guy. I love how those guys look, by the way, but fighting them can be terrible. Especially on hardcore, because it's like one wrong hit and you're gone, buddy. We stay out of those circles. We make a healthy attempt to stay out of those circles, which is making it hard for me to get my mana back, but that's alright. We'll put a little extra ward on with our potion before we get smacked. There we go. We did it. We did it. That's our first monolith completed. We started this monolith at level 34. Our resistances were not good enough to be able to do it, but the build was good enough. And now we're just going to pop out of here. We're going to collect our books to get a ton of XP. And that was an entire level you just saw, just purely from the books. Now I'm going to continue doing this until I can get to the next part of the build. And since the video is getting extremely long, I'm going to just jump cut to that to save you a little bit of your life. All right. It's the final countdown. We finally get to switch back to Frost. This is what we all wanted the entire time, I'm sure you know. And importantly, we're going to 7 points in this here node called... It's fine, I wasn't meant to have a good life. And now it's time to switch back to Frost. And importantly, we're only going to put 7 points into this freezing point node so that we can activate the part that says your armor shred chance is converted into frostbite chance for cold spells. We like that. That gives us a lot of damage. But that's all we wanted this node for, so we're not going to finish it out. We're actually going back over here now into the old Decree of Eternal Tundra. And that's right, to get ourselves more ward, because that's what we're doing. We're being tanky. Since we're switching into a Frost build again, we have to despecialize a node here. We will no longer be using Lava Talon. It's gone. We don't want this to be a fire skill anymore. They say that. They make it pretty clear on the guide. But just in case you were about to miss it, don't forget. It's very important. And since we're doing that, we're going to have to switch all of our other stuff back over to Frost for our damage. Goodbye, gear. I loved you. You did well. But now we've got other fish to fry. And I have just the piece of fish to put on the grill here. We need some armor shred chance so that it matters that we have the buff that we just got. I am going to use this very lucky drop that I have here. It's an Exalty Boy, and you might be thinking that it doesn't have any spell damage on it, so it's not that great. Well, this one's intrinsic was only 8 anyway. I'm going to be falling behind a little bit on the spell mana cost, but that's okay. That's okay. It also is going to let me forge on some cold damage, which we desperately will want. And we're going to have to try to change that around on some of our other pieces. Luckily, this ring has elemental damage, so it works both ways. But over here, we're only on fire damage, and we're going to have to fix that, which also is going to mean refixing our resistances. I'll catch you on the flip side. Alright, so we did a little bit of crafting, and we have an entirely different set of gear. And including, yes, this terrible blue. Luckily, it had void resistance, and I got a lot of necrotic resistance, and honestly, that's all I needed from my chest at this time, but I am really looking to upgrade that. That's just how important resistances are, at least in my opinion. I'm willing to do that to get my resistances right. Aside from that, we've got this set bonus that is giving me 25 spell cold damage, which is pretty essential because I had to switch to this weapon that is going to be using the chance to shred armor, and it's got a little bit of cold damage on it. I can still forge it up as I level up, I'm just too low level to do that, but it doesn't come with any intrinsic spell damage or anything like that, so this set is going to help that happen. It also gives us a bunch of freeze rate multiplier, which is really nice, and we have a little bit of that on rings here and there, as well as a ton of cold damage. Luckily, this purple belt rolled with cold damage on it, so yes, I'm feeling like a bit of a lucky boy for that. In terms of resistances, my poison is terrible, my lightning is fine, but other than that, I'm doing pretty well. So I think we're going to be going through and shredding and seeing where the rest of the build takes us. Okay, so we hit level 50, and there is another little intricacy here that could be easily missed by the average player, and that is that in our last slot here, we're actually putting Static Orb, and we're going to level this up, not so that we can use it during gameplay, but so that our Flame Rush, which is now going to cast Static Orb on its own, will get all of the benefits from that. So we're not actually casting this, we're not even putting it on our bar, we're keeping Runic Invocation on our bar so that we continue to get those runes to get those passive buffs, but we're going to get extra static orbs coming out whenever we do our Flame Rush. So this is how I got to level 50 and cleared out my first Monolith using the Runemaster leveling guide from Maxroll.gg. A reminder that that link will be in the description if you want to follow the guide for yourself. Now, this is not the kind of build that you're going to run into the complete endgame, although you could. I'm going to be looking to switch into a different build on this character, and if you have one in mind that you'd like me to try, especially if it's one of the recommended builds on Maxroll that I could test for everybody, then let me know in the comments below which one you think I should do. Now for my personal take on this, I gotta say that this was not the most fun that I've ever had in the game. This build is fine, but it's not really thrilling. I liked it a lot more when it was just using Glacier, although I understand why it switched into the other direction. The reason they would pick a build like this, I believe, isn't because it's the single best build that's available, but it leaves you a lot of room for mistakes. When I'm fighting this last boss, I don't hardly even have to think of anything except for how high is my mana, because that determines which button I'm going to press. Either I'm going to Mana Strike, or I'm going to Frost Claw. So I think they picked the build because it's very safe, and the thing that we can learn from this build in general is that having sustain, be it leech on damage, or health on hit, or ward gain, having that sort of sustain makes the game a lot easier for you. There were times where my resistances almost didn't even matter. I could stand in giant abilities that normally should have killed me, and that didn't matter either. So if I were recommending a leveling build for somebody on hardcore, this might be one to keep a lookout for. What I didn't like about this build is that I constantly was respeccing things back and forth. To be fair, they say right in their own guide that one of the cons is that you have to respec back and forth, and that's not super fun. I find that having to switch the gear to keep up with it was a little bit annoying. Luckily, I had a stash, and when it came to the final battles, I dove into my stash and grabbed what I could grab. But for the early game, I wanted to make sure that I was just using whatever I found on the ground, because that made a lot more sense. By the end game, it doesn't matter. If you needed to farm for gear, you could spend 6 hours doing it. I didn't want to spend that 6 hours, and I appreciate you for not making me. So I will say that it appears that the entire build was meant to be tanky and easy to use. I think they accomplished that very well. If you're looking for thrilling fun, this probably isn't the build for you. If you're looking for something a little more flashy, there are of course other builds for just that. Now I intend to review all of these leveling guides from Maxroll, and after I'm done with that, I intend to review a bunch of the endgame guides. Now, I don't know how many endgame guides they have, but I know that it's a lot. So we're going to try to let the viewers pick which order I do those in so that I can get to the ones that you like a little bit faster. If anything that I said here today helped you out, then please do subscribe, and you'll find a link for my Twitch in the description if you think you might want to watch me play hardcore and lose a bunch of characters and maybe scream about it. They call me Rage Panda for a reason. For now, I want to thank you for watching. I have been Rage Panda 1, and I will see you in the next one.